obligated and unobligated balances of amounts in the Securities and Exchange Commission Reserve Fund shall be transferred to the general fund of the Treasury. E, closing of account. For the purposes of Section 1555 of Title 31, United States Code, the Securities and Exchange Commission Reserve Fund shall be considered closed and thereafter shall not be available for obligation or expenditure for any purpose upon execution of the transfer required under subsection D. Section 30004, Appropriations for Defense Production Act. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2025, out of amounts not otherwise appropriated, $1 billion to remain available until September 30th, 2027 to carry out the Defense Production Act, 50 U.S.C. 4501. Title IV, Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation.
Section 40001, Coast Guard Mission Readiness. A, in general, Chapter 11 of Title 14 United States Code is amended by adding at the end the following. Subchapter 5, Coast Guard Mission Readiness. Section 1181, Special Appropriations. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Coast Guard for fiscal year 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $24,593,500,000,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2029, notwithstanding paragraphs 1 and 2 of Section 1105A and Sections 1131, 1132, 1133, and 1156 to use expedited processes to procure or acquire new operational assets and systems, to maintain existing assets and systems, to design, construct, plan, engineer, and improve necessary shore infrastructure, and to enhance operational resilience for monitoring, search and rescue, interdiction, hardening of maritime approaches, and navigational safety, of which $1,142,500,000,000 is provided for procurement and acquisition of fixed-wing aircraft, equipment related to such aircraft, and training simulators and program management for such aircraft to provide for security of the maritime border. $2,283,000,000,000 is provided for procurement and acquisition of rotary wing aircraft, equipment related to such aircraft, and training simulators and program management for such aircraft to provide for security of the maritime border. 3, $266 billion is provided for procurement and acquisition of long-range unmanned aircraft and base stations, equipment related to such aircraft and base stations, and program management for such aircraft and base stations to provide for security of the maritime border. 4, $4,300,000,000,000 is provided for procurement of offshore patrol cutters, equipment related to such cutters, and program management for such cutters to provide operational presence and security of the maritime border for the interdiction of persons and controlled substances. 5, $1 trillion is provided for procurement of fast response cutters, equipment related to such cutters, and program management for such cutters to provide operational presence and security of the maritime border for interdiction of persons and controlled substances. 6, $4,300,000,000,000 is provided for procurement of polar security cutters, equipment related to such cutters, and program management for such cutters to ensure timely presence of the Coast Guard in the Arctic and Antarctic regions. 7, $3,500,000,000 is provided for procurement of Arctic security cutters, equipment related to such cutters, and program management for such cutters to ensure timely presence of the Coast Guard in the Arctic and Antarctic regions. 8, $816 billion is provided for procurement of light and medium ice-breaking cutters and equipment related to such cutters from shipyards that have demonstrated success in the cost-effective application of design standards and in delivering on schedule and within budget vessels of size and tonnage that are not less than the size and tonnage of the cutters described in this paragraph, and for program management for such cutters to expend domestic ice-breaking capacity. 9, $126 billion is provided for procurement of waterways, commerce cutters, equipment related to such cutters, and program management for such cutters to support aids to navigation, waterways, and coastal security, and to search and rescue in inland waterways. 10, $4,379 billion is provided for design, planning, engineering, recapitalization, construction, rebuilding, and improvement of, and program management for shore facilities, of which A, $425 billion is provided for design, planning, engineering, construction of, and program management for 1, the enlisted boot camp barracks and multi-use training center, and 2, other related facilities at the enlisted boot camp. B, $500 billion is provided for 1, construction, improvement, and dredging of the Coast Guard yard, and 2, acquisition of a floating dry dock for the Coast Guard yard. C, not more than $2,729,500 million is provided for home ports and hangars for cutters and aircraft for which funds are appropriated under paragraph 1 through 9, and D, $300 billion is provided for home porting of the existing polar icebreaker commissioned into service in 2025. 11, $2,200 billion is provided for aviation cutter and shore facility depot maintenance and maintenance of command, control, communication, computer, and cyber assets. 12, $170 billion is provided for improving maritime domain awareness on the maritime border at United States ports and land-based facilities and in the cyber domain. And 13, $75 billion is provided for provided to contract the services of acquire or procure autonomous maritime systems. B, technical and conforming amendment. The analysis for Chapter 11 of Title 14 United States Code is amended by adding at the end the following. Subchapter 5, Coast Guard Mission Readiness, 1181, Special Appropriations. Section 4002, Spectrum Auctions. A, definitions. In this section, 1, Assistant Secretary. The term Assistant Secretary means the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information. 2, Commission. The term Commission means the Federal Communications Commission. 3, Covered Band. The term covered band, A, except as provided in subparagraph B, means the band of frequencies between 1.3 gigahertz and 10.5 gigahertz, and B, does not include 1, the band of frequencies between 3.1 gigahertz and 3.45 gigahertz for purpose of auction, reallocation, modification, or withdrawal, or 2, the band of frequencies between 7.4 gigahertz and 8.4 gigahertz for purpose of auction, reallocation, modification, or withdrawal. 4, full power commercial licensed use cases. The term full power commercial licensed use cases means flexible use wireless broadband services with base station power levels sufficient for high power, high density, and wide area communication mobile services consistent with the service rules under Part 27 of Title 47, Code of Federal Regulations, or any successor regulations for wireless broadband deployment through the covered band. B, general auction authority. 1, amendment. Section 309(1)11 of the Communications Act of 1934, 47 U.S. Code 309(1)11 is amended by striking, grant a license or permit under this subsection shall expire March 9, 2023, and all that follows, and inserting the following, complete a system of competitive bidding under this subsection shall expire September 30th, 2034, except that with respect to the electromagnetic spectrum, A, between frequencies of 3.1 gigahertz and 3.45 gigahertz, such authority shall not apply. And B, the frequencies of 7.4 gigahertz and 8.4 gigahertz, such authority shall not apply. 2, spectrum auctions. The Commission shall grant licenses through systems of competitive bidding before the expiration of the general auction authority of the Commission under Section 309(1)11 of the Communications Act of 1934, 47 U.S.C. 309(1)11 as amended by paragraph 1 of this subsection, for not less than 300 megahertz, including by completing a system of competitive bidding not later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this act, for not less than 100 megahertz in the band between 3.9 gigahertz and 4.2 gigahertz. C, identification for reallocation. In general, the Assistant Secretary, in consultation with the Commission, shall identify 500 megahertz of frequencies in the covered band for reallocation to non-federal use, shared federal and non-federal use, or a combination thereof, for full power commercial licensed use cases that, A, as of the date of enactment of this act are allocated for federal use, and B, shall be in addition to the 300 megahertz of frequencies for which the Commission grants licenses under subsection B2. 2, schedule. The Assistant Secretary shall identify the frequencies under paragraph 1 according to the following schedule. A, not later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this act, the Assistant Secretary shall identify not less than 200 megahertz of frequencies within the covered band. B, not later than 4 years after the date of enactment of this act, the Assistant Secretary shall identify any remaining bandwidth required to be identified under paragraph 1. 3, required analysis. A, in general, in determining under paragraph 1 which specific frequencies within the covered band to reallocate, the Assistant Secretary shall determine the feasibility of the reallocation of frequencies. B, requirements. In conducting the analysis of subparagraph A, the Assistant Secretary shall assess the net revenue potential, relocation or sharing costs as applicable, and the feasibility of reallocating specific frequencies with the goal of identifying the best approach to maximize net proceeds of system of competitive bidding for the Treasury, consistent with Section 309(1) of the Communication Act of 1934, 47 U.S. Code 309(1). D, auction. The Commission shall grant licenses for the frequencies identified for a reallocation under subsection C through systems of competitive bidding in accordance with the following schedule. 1, not later than 4 years after the date of enactment of this act, the Commission shall, after notifying the Assistant Secretary, complete one or more systems of competitive bidding for not less than 200 megahertz of the frequencies. 2, not later than 8 years after the date of enactment of this act, the Commission shall, after notifying the Assistant Secretary, complete one or more systems of competitive bidding for any frequencies under subsection C that remain to be auctioned after compliance with paragraph 1 of this subsection. E, limitation. The President shall modify or withdraw any frequencies proposed for reallocation under this section not later than 60 days before the commencement of a system of competitive bidding scheduled by the Commission with respect to that frequency, if the President determines that such modification or withdrawal is necessary to protect the national security of the United States. F, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Commerce for fiscal year 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $50 billion to remain available through September 30th, 2034 to provide additional support for the Assistant Secretary to 1, conduct a timely spectrum analysis of the bands of frequencies, A, between 2.7 gigahertz and 2.9 gigahertz, B, between 4.4 gigahertz and 4.9 gigahertz, C, between 7.25 gigahertz and 7.4 gigahertz. And 2, publish a biennial report with the last report to be published not later than June 30th, 2034, on the value of all spectrum used by federal entities as defined in Section 113(1) of the National Telecommunication and Information Administration Organization Act 47 U.S.C. 9231 that assesses the value of bands of frequencies of increments of not more than 100 megahertz. Section 40003, Air Traffic Control Improvements. A, in general, for the purpose of the acquisition, construction, sustainment, and improvement of facilities and equipment necessary to improve or maintain aviation safety, in addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated to the Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal year 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated to remain available until September 30th, 2029. 1, $4,750 billion for telecommunications and infrastructure modernization and system upgrades. $3 trillion for radar system replacement, $500 billion for runway safety technologies, runway lighting systems, airport surface surveillance technologies, and to carry out Section 347 of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, for $300 billion for enterprise information systems, display systems, 5, $80 billion to acquire and install not less than 50 automated weather observing systems, to acquire and install not less than 60 visual weather observing systems, to acquire and install not less than 64 weather camera sites, and to acquire and install weather stations. 6, $40 billion to carry out Section 44745 of Title 49 United States Code, except for the activities described in paragraph 5. 7, $1,900 billion for necessary actions to construct a new air route traffic control center in the subsection referred to as ARTCC, provided that not more than 2% of such amount is used for planning or administrative purposes, provided further that at least 3 existing ARTCCs are divested and integrated into the newly constructed ARTCC. 8, $100 billion to conduct an ARTCC realignment and consolidation effort under which at least 10 existing ARTCCs are closed or consolidated to facilitate recapitalization of ARTCC facilities owned and operated by the Federal Aviation Administration. 9, $1 trillion to support recapitalization and consolidation of terminal radar approach control facilities. In this subsection, referred to as TRACONs, the analysis of identification of TRACONs for divestment, consolidation, or integration, planning, site selection, facility acquisition, and transition activities and other appropriate activities for carrying out such divestment, consolidation, or integration, and the establishment of brand new TRACONs. 10, $350 billion for unstaffed infrastructure and replacement. 11, $50 billion to carry out Section 961 of FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. 12, $300 billion to carry out Section 619 of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. 13, $50 billion to carry out Section 621 of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 and to deploy remote tower technology in untowered airports. 14, $100 billion for air traffic control advanced training technologies. B, quarterly reporting. Not later than 180 days after the date of enactment of this act, and every 90 days thereafter, the Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration shall submit to Congress a report that describes any expenditures under this section. Section 40004, Space Launch and Reentry Licensing and Permitting User Fees. A, in general, Chapter 509 of Title 51, United States Code, is amended by adding at the end of the following new section. Section 50924, Space Launch and Reentry Licensing and Permitting User Fees. A, fees. 1, in general, the Secretary of Transportation shall impose a fee which shall be deposited in the account established under subsection B on each launch or reentry carried out under a license or permit issue under Section 50904 during 2026 or a subsequent year, in an amount equal to the lesser of A, the amount specified in paragraph 2 for the year involved per pound of the weight of the payload, or B, the amount specified in paragraph 3 for the year involved. 2, paragraph 2, specified amount. The amount specified in this paragraph is A, for 2026, 25 cents, B, for 2027, 35 cents, C, for 2028, 50 cents, D, for 2029, 60 cents, E, for 2030, 75 cents, F, for 2031, $1, G, for 2032, $1.25, C, for 2033, $1.50, and I, for 2034, and each subsequent year, the amount specified in this paragraph for the previous years increased by the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, all items United States city average over the previous year. 3, paragraph 3, specified amount. The amount specified in this paragraph is A, for 2026, $30,000, B, for 2027, $40,000, C, for 2028, $50,000, D, for 2029, $75,000, E, for 2030, $100,000, F, for 2031, $125,000, G, for 2032, $170,000, H, for 2033, $200,000, and I, for 2034, and each subsequent year, the amount specified in this paragraph for the previous year increased by the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, all items United States city average over the previous year. B, Office of Commercial Space Transportation Launch and Reentry Licensing and Permitting Fund. There is established in the Treasury of the United States a separate account which shall be known as the Office of Commercial Space Transportation Launch and Reentry Licensing and Permitting Fund for the purposes of expenses of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation of the Federal Aviation Administration and to carry out Section 603B of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. 70% of the amounts deposited into the fund shall be available for such purposes and shall be available without further appropriation and without fiscal year limitations. B, clerical amendment. The table of sections for Chapter 509 of Title 51 United States Code is amended by inserting after the item relating to Section 50923 the following. 50924, Space Launch and Reentry Licensing and Permitting User Fees. Section 40005, Mars Missions, Artemis Missions, and Moon to Mars Program. In general, Chapter 203 of Title 51 United States Code is amended by adding at the end of the following. Section 20306, Special Appropriations for Mars Missions, Artemis Missions, and Moon to Mars Program. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the administration for the fiscal year 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $9,995,000,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2032 to use as follows. $700 billion to be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026 for the procurement using a competitively bid firm fixed price contract with the United States commercial provider as defined in section 501017 of a high-performance Mars telecommunications orbiter. A, that one is capable of providing robust continuous communication for a Mars sample return mission as described in section 4323C of the National Aeronautics and Space Transition Authorization Act of 2017, 51 U.S. Code 20302, note Public Law 115-10. And two, future Mars surface, orbital, and human exploration missions. Two, supports autonomous operations, onboard processing, and extended mission duration capabilities. And three, is selected from among the commercial proposals that one, receive funding from the administration in fiscal year 2024 or 2025 for commercial design studies for Mars sample returns, and two, proposed a separate, independently launched Mars telecommunications orbiter supporting an end-to-end Mars sample return mission, and B, which shall be delivered to the administration not later than December 31st, 2028. Two, $2.6 trillion to meet the requirements of Section 20302A using the program of record known as of the date of the enactment of this section as Gateway and as described in Section 10811B2B4 of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Authorization Act of 2022, 51 U.S.C. 20302, note Public Law 117-167, of which not less than $750 billion shall be obligated for each of fiscal years 2026, 2027, and 2028. Three, $4.1 trillion for expenses related to meeting the requirements of Section 10812 of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Authorization Act of 2022, 5 U.S. Code 2031301, Public Law 117-167, for the procurement, transportation, integration, operation, and other necessary expenses of the Space Launch System for Artemis Mission 4 and 5, of which not less than $1.025 trillion shall be obligated for each of fiscal years 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029. Four, $20 billion for expenses related to the continued procurement of the multi-purpose crew vehicle described in Section 303 of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Authorization Act of 2020, 42 U.S. Code 18323, known as the Orion, for use with the Space Launch System on the Artemis 4 mission and reuse in subsequent Artemis missions, of which not less than $20 billion shall be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026. 5, $1.25 trillion for expenses related to the operation of the International Space Station and for the purpose of meeting the requirements under Section 503A of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Authorization Act of 2010, 42 U.S.C. 18353A, of which not less than $250 billion shall be obligated for such expenses for each of fiscal years 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. 6, $1 trillion for infrastructure improvements at the manned spaceflight centers of the administration, of which not less than $120 billion shall be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026 for the construction, revitalization, recapitalization, and other infrastructure projects and improvements at the center described in Executive Order 12641, 53 Federal Register 18816, relating to the designation related to designating certain facilities of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the state of Mississippi as the John C. Stennis Space Center. B, $250 billion shall be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026 for construction, revitalization, recapitalization, and other infrastructure projects and improvements at the center described in Executive Order 11129, 28 Federal Register 12787, relating to designating certain facilities in the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and of the Department of Defense in the state of Florida at the John F. Kennedy Space Center. C, $300 billion shall be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026 for construction, revitalization, recapitalization, and other infrastructure projects and improvements at the center described in the joint resolution entitled Joint Resolution to Designate the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas as the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in honor of the late president, approved February 17, 1973, Public Law 93-8, 87, Statute 7. D, $100 billion shall be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026 for construction, revitalization, recapitalization, and other infrastructure projects and improvements at the center described in Executive Order 10870, 25 Federal Register 2197, relating to designating the facilities of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in Huntsville, Alabama as the George C. Marshall Space Flight Center. E, $300 billion shall be obligated not later than fiscal year 2026 for construction, revitalization, recapitalization, and other infrastructure projects and improvements at the Michaud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, Louisiana. And F, $85 billion shall be obligated to carry out subsection B, of which not less than $5 million shall be designated for the transportation of the space vehicle described in that subsection, with the remainder transferred not later than the date, that is 18 months after the date of enactment of this section, and entity designated under the subsection for the purpose of constructing a facility to house the space vehicle referred to in that subsection. 7, $325 billion to fulfill contract number 80JSC024CA002 issued by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration on June 26, 2024, space vehicle transfer in general, not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this section. The administrator shall identify the space described in paragraph 2 to be
B, placed on public exhibition at an entity within the metropolitan statistical area where such center is located. 2, space vehicle described. A space vehicle described in this paragraph is a vessel that A, has flown into space, B, has carried astronauts, and C, is selected with the concurrence of an entity designated by the administrator. 3, transfer. A, in general, not later than 18 months after the date of the enactment of this section, the space vehicle identified under paragraph 1 shall be transferred to an entity designated by the administrator. B, title, not later than 1 year after the date on which a space vehicle is identified under paragraph 1, the federal government shall, as applicable, transfer the title to the space vehicle to the entity designated by the administrator. C, responsibility. The transfer under this paragraph shall be carried out under the administrator or acting administrator. C, obligation of funds. Funds appropriated under subsection A shall be obligated as follows. 1, not less than 50% of the total funds in subsection A shall be obligated not later than September 30th, 2028. 2, 100% of funds shall be obligated not later than September 30th, 2029. 3, all associated outlays shall occur not later than September 30th, 2034. B, clerical amendment. The table of sections for Chapter 203 of Title 51 United States Code is amended by adding at the end the following: 20306, special appropriations for Mars missions, Artemis missions, and Moons to Mars program. Section 40006, corporate average fuel economy civil penalties. A, in general, Section 32912 of Title 49 United States Code is amended. 1, in subsection B, in the matter preceding paragraph 1 by striking $5 and inserting $0, and 2, in subsection C1B by striking $10 and inserting $0. B, effect applicability. The amendments made by subsection A shall 1, take effect on the date of the enactment of this section, and 2, apply to all model years of manufacture for which the Secretary of Transportation has not provided a notification pursuant to Section 32903B2B of Title 49 United States Code, specifying the penalty due for the average fuel economy of that manufacturer being less than the applicable standard prescribed under Section 32902 of that title. Section 40007, payments for lease of metropolitan Washington airports. Section 49104B of Title 49 United States Code is amended to read as follows. B, payments. 1, in general, subject to paragraph 2, under the lease, the airport's authority must pay to the general fund of the Treasury annually an amount computed using the GNP price deflator, A, during the period from 1987 to 2026, equal to $3 million in 1987 dollars, and B, for 2027 and subsequent years, equal to $15 million in 2027 dollars. 2, renegotiation. The Secretary and Airports Authority shall renegotiate the level of lease payments at least once every 10 years to ensure that in no year the amount specified in paragraph 1B is less than $15 million in 2027 dollars. Section 40008, rescission of certain amounts for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Any unobligated balances of amounts appropriated or otherwise made available by sections 40001, 40002, 40003, and 40004 of Public Law 117-169, 136-2028 are hereby rescinded. Section 40009, reduction in annual transfer to Travel Promotion Fund. Subsection D2B of the Travel Promotion Act of 2009, 22 U.S.C. 2131 D2B is amended by striking $100 million and inserting $20 million. Section 40010, treatment of unobligated funds for alternative fuel and low emissions aviation technology. Out of the amounts made available in Section 40007A of Title IV of Public Law 117-169, 49 U.S.C. 44504 note, any obligated balances of such amounts are hereby rescinded. Section 40011, rescission of amounts appropriated to Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. Of the unobligated balances of amounts made available under Section 106A of the CHIPS Act of 2022, Public Law 117-167, 136-1392, $850 million are permanently rescinded. Section 40012, support for artificial intelligence under the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. A, in general, Section 60102 of Division F of Public Law 117-58, 47 U.S.C. 1702 is amended. 1, in subsection A2, A, by redesignating subparagraphs B through N as subparagraphs F through R, respectively. B, by redesignating subparagraph A as subparagraph D. C, by inserting before subparagraph D, as so redesignated, the following. A, artificial intelligence. The term artificial intelligence has the meaning given the term in Section 5002 of the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act of 2020, 15 U.S.C. 9401. B, artificial intelligence model. The term artificial intelligence model means a software component of an information system that implements artificial intelligence technology and uses computational, statistical, or machine learning techniques to produce outputs from a defined set of inputs. C, artificial intelligence system. The term artificial intelligence system means any data system, software, hardware, application, tool, or utility that operates in whole or in part using artificial intelligence. D, by inserting after subparagraph D, as so redesignated, the following. E, automated decision system. The term automated decision system means any computational process derived from machine learning, statistical modeling, data analytics, or artificial intelligence that issues a simplified output, including a score, classification, or recommendation, to materially influence or replace human decision-making. And E, by striking subparagraph O, as so redesignated, and inserting the following. O, project. The term project means an undertaking by a sub-grantee under this section to construct and deploy infrastructure for the provision of 1, broadband services, or 2, artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems. 2, in subsection B, by adding at the end the following. 5, appropriation for fiscal year 2025. A, in general, in addition to any amounts otherwise appropriated to the program, there is appropriated to the Assistant Secretary for fiscal year 2025 out of any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $500 million to remain available until expended to carry out the program. B, set aside for artificial intelligence infrastructure master services agreements of the amount appropriated under subparagraph A, $25 million shall be used by the Assistant Secretary for the purpose of negotiating master service agreements on behalf of subgrantees of an eligible entity or political subdivision to enable access to quantity purchasing and licensing discounts for the construction, acquisition, and deployment of infrastructure for the provision of artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems funded under this section. 3, in subsection F, A in paragraph 5 by striking and at the end, B by redesignating paragraph 6 as paragraph 7, and C by inserting after paragraph 5 the following. 6, the construction and deployment of infrastructure for the provisions of artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems, and 4, in subsection G3 by striking subparagraph B and inserting the following. B, may, in addition to other authority under applicable law, deobligate grant funds awarded to an eligible entity that 1, violates paragraph 2, 2, demonstrates an insufficient level of performance or wasteful or fraudulent spending as defined in advance by the Assistant Secretary, or 3, if obligated, any funds made available under subsection B5A is not in compliance with subsection Q or R, and 5, in subsection J1, A in subparagraph A, 1 in clause 3 by striking and at the end, 2 by redesignating clause 4 as clause 5, and 3 by inserting after clause 3 the following. 4, certifies that the eligibility entity of obligated any funds made available under subsection B5A is compliance with subsections Q and R, and B in subparagraph B, 1 in clause 3 by striking and at the end, 2 by redesignating clause 4 as clause 5, and 3 by inserting after clause 3 the following. 4, certifies that the eligibility entity of obligated any funds made available under subsection B5A is in compliance with subsections Q and R, and C in subparagraph C, 1 by redesignating clauses 4 and 5 as clauses 5 and 6 respectively, 2 by inserting after clause 3 the following. 4, certifies that the eligibility entity, if obligated, any funds made available under subsection B5A is in compliance with subsections Q and R, and 6, by adding at the end the following. P, receipt of funds conditioned on temporary pause and efficiencies. On and after the date of the enactment of this subsection, no funds made available under subsection B5A may be obligated to an eligible entity or political subdivision thereof that is not in compliance with subsections Q and R. Q, temporary pause. 1, in general, except as provided in paragraph 2, no eligible entity or political subdivision thereof to which funds made available under subsection B5A are obligated on or after the date of enactment of this subsection may enforce during the 10-year period beginning on the date of enactment of this subsection any law or regulation that eligible entity or political subdivision thereof limiting, restricting, or otherwise regulating artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems entered into interstate commerce. 2, rule of construction. Paragraph 1 may not be construed to prohibit the enforcement of any law or regulation. A, the primary purpose and effect of which is to, 1, remove legal impediments to or facilitate the deployment or operation of an artificial intelligence model, artificial intelligence system, or automated decision system. Or 2, streamline licensing, permitting, routing, zoning, procurement, or reporting procedures in a manner that facilitates the adoption of artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems. Or B, that does not impose any substantive design, performance, data holding, documentation, civil liability, taxation fee, or other requirement of artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems, unless that requirement is imposed under 1, federal law, 2, a general applicable law, such as a body of common law, and C, that does not impose a fee or bond unless 1, the fee or bond is reasonable and cost-based, and 2, under the fee or bond, artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, and automated decision systems are treated in the same manner as other models and systems that perform comparable functions. R, master service agreements. An eligible entity or political subdivision thereof to which funds made available under subsection B5A are obligated on or after the date of the enactment of this subsection shall certify to the Assistant Secretary either that 1, each subgrantee of the eligible entity or political subdivision is utilizing applicable master service agreements negotiated using amounts made available under subsection B5B, or 2, each contract, license, purchase order, or service agreement entered into, procured, or made by a subgrantee of the eligible entity or political subdivision for purposes described in subsection B5B is at least as cost-effective as the terms of executable master services agreements, as applicable, negotiated by the Assistant Secretary using amounts made available under subsection B5B. B, technical conforming amendments. Section 60102A1 of Division F of Public Law 117-58, 47 U.S.C. 1702A1 is amended, 1, in subparagraph B by striking a project and inserting a project described in subsection A2OI, and 2, in subparagraph D by striking a project and inserting a project described in subsection A2OI. Title V, Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Subtitle A, Oil and Gas Leasing. Section 50101, Onshore Oil and Gas Leasing. A, Repeal of Inflation Reduction Act provisions. 1, onshore oil and gas royalty rates, subsection A of section 50262 of Public Law 117-169-136.2056 is repealed, and provision of law amended or repealed by that subsection is restored or revived as if the subsection had not been enacted into law. 2, non-competitive leasing. Subsection E of section 50262 of Public Law 117-169-136.2057 is repealed, and any provision of law amended or repealed by that subsection is restored or revived as if the subsection had not been enacted into law. B, requirement to immediately resume onshore oil and gas leases. 1, in general, the Secretary of the Interior shall immediately resume quarterly onshore oil and gas lease sales in compliance with the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 181 et sec. 2, requirement, the Secretary of the Interior shall, A, that any oil and gas lease required under paragraph 1 is conducted immediately on completion of an applicable scoping, public comment, and environmental analysis requirements under the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 181 et sec, and the National Environmental Policy Act of 1965, 42 U.S.C. 4321, and B, that the process described in subparagraph A are conducted in a timely manner to ensure compliance with subsection B1. 3, lease of oil and gas lands, section 17B1A of the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 226B1A, as amended by subsection A, is amended by inserting, for purposes of the previous sentence, the term eligible land means all lands that are subject to leasing under this act and are not excluded from leasing by statutory prohibition. And the term available with respect to eligible lands means those that have been designated as open for leasing under a land use plan developed under Section 202 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1712, and that have been nominated for leasing through the submission of an expression of interest, are subject to drainage in the absence of leasing, or are otherwise designated as available pursuant to regulations adopted by the Secretary after sales are necessary. C, quarterly lease sales. 1, in general, in accordance with the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 181, each fiscal year the Secretary of the Interior shall conduct a minimum of 4 oil and gas lease sales of available land in each of the following states: A, Wyoming, B, New Mexico, C, Colorado, D, Utah, E, Montana, F, North Dakota, G, Oklahoma, H, Nevada, I, Alaska. 2, requirement. In conducting a lease sale under paragraph 1 in a state described in that paragraph, the Secretary of the Interior, A, shall offer not less than 50% of available parcels nominated for oil and gas development under the applicable resource management plan in effect for relevant Bureau of Land Management resource management areas within the applicable state, and B, shall not restrict the parcels offered to one Bureau of Land Management field office within the applicable state unless all nominated parcels are located within the same Bureau of Land Management field office. 3, replacement sales. The Secretary of the Interior shall conduct a replacement sale during the same fiscal year if A, a lease sale under paragraph 1 is canceled, delayed, or deferred, including for a lack of eligible parcels, or B, during a lease sale under paragraph 1, the percentage of acreage that does not receive a bid is equal to or greater than 25% of the acreage offered. D, Mineral Leasing Act reforms. Section 17 of the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 226, as amended by subsection A, is amended. 1, by striking the section designation and all that follows through the end of subsection A and inserting the following. Section 17, leasing of oil and gas parcels. A, leasing authorized. 1, in general, any parcel of land subject to disposition under this act that is known or believed to contain oil or gas deposits shall be made available for leasing subject to paragraph 2 by the Secretary of the Interior not later than 18 months after the date of the receipt of the Secretary of an expression of interest in the leasing applicable parcel of land available for disposition under this section. If the Secretary determines that the parcel of land is open to oil or gas leasing under the approved resource management plan applicable to the planning area in which the parcel of land is located, that is in effect on the date on which the expression of interest was submitted to the Secretary, referred to in this subsection as the approved resource management plan. 2, resource management plans. A, lease in terms and conditions. A lease issued by the Secretary under the section with respect to applicable parcel of land made available for leasing under paragraph 1. 1 shall be subject to the terms and conditions of the approved resource management plan, and 2 may not require any stipulations or mitigation requirements not included in the approved resource management plan. B, effective amendment. The initiation of an amendment to an approved resource management plan shall not prevent or delay the Secretary from making the applicable parcel of land available for leasing in accordance with the approved resource management plan if the other requirements in this section have been met as determined by the Secretary's. 2, in subsection P, by adding at the end the following. 4, term. A permit to drill approved under this section shall be valid for a single, non-renewable 4-year period beginning on the date that the permit to drill is approved. And 3, by striking subsection Q and inserting the following. Q, commingling of production. The Secretary of Interior shall approve applications allowing for the commingling of production from 2 or more sources, including the area of oil and a gas lease, the area included in a drilling spacing unit, a unit participating area, a communitized area, or non-federal property. Before production reaches the point of royalty measurement, regardless of ownership, the royalty rates and the number of percentage of acres for each source, if the applicant agrees to install measurement devices for each source, utilize an allocation method that achieves volume measurement, uncertainty levels within plus or minus 2% during the production phase reported on a monthly basis, or utilize an approved periodic well testing methodology. Production from multiple oil and gas leases, drilling space units, communitized areas, or participating areas from a single wellbore shall be considered a single source. Nothing in this subsection shall prevent the Secretary of the Interior from continuing the current practice of exercising discretion to authorize higher percentage volume measurements, uncertainty levels, if appropriate technical and economic justifications have been provided. Section 50102, offshore oil and gas leasing. A, lease sales. 1, Gulf of America region. A, in general. Notwithstanding the 2024 to 2029 National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program and any successor leasing program that does not satisfy the requirements of this section, in addition to lease sales, which may be held under the program and except within areas subject to existing oil and gas leasing moratoria, the Secretary of the Interior shall conduct a minimum of 30 region-wide oil and gas lease sales in a manner consistent with the schedule described in subparagraph B, in the region identified in the map, depicting the lease terms and economic conditions accompanying the final notice of sale of the Bureau of Oceanic Energy Management entitled Gulf of Mexico Outer Continental Shelf Region-Wide Oil and Gas Lease Sale 25485 FedReg 8010 February 12, 2020. B, timing requirement. Of the not fewer than 30 region-wide lease sales required under this paragraph, the Secretary of Interior shall, 1, hold not fewer than 1 lease sale in the region described in subparagraph A by December 15, 2025, 2, hold not fewer than 2 lease sales in the region in each of the calendar years 2026 to 2039, 1 of which shall be held by March 15th of the applicable calendar year, and 1 of which shall be held after March 15th, but not later than August 15th of the applicable calendar year, and 3, hold not fewer than 1 lease sale in the region in calendar year 2040, which shall be held on March 15th, 2040. Alaska region. A, in general, the Secretary of the Interior shall conduct a minimum of 6 offshore lease sales in a manner consistent with the schedule described in subparagraph B in the Cook Inlet Planning Area as identified in the 2017 to 2022 Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program published on November 18, 2016 by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, as announced in the notice of availability of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management entitled Notice of Availability of the 2017 to 2022 Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program proposed final program, 81 Federal Register 84612, November 23rd, 2016. B, timing requirements. Of the not fewer than 6 lease sales required under this paragraph, the Secretary of the Interior shall hold not fewer than 1 lease sale in the area described in subparagraph A in each calendar years 2026 to 2028, and in each of the calendar years 2030 to 2032, by March 15th of the applicable calendar year. B, requirements. 1, terms and stipulations for Gulf of America sales. In conducting lease sales under subsection A1, the Secretary of the Interior, A, shall subject to subparagraph C, offer the same lease form, lease terms, economic conditions, and lease stipulations 4 through 9 as contained in the final notice of the sale of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management entitled Gulf of Mexico, Outer Continental Shelf Region, Wide Oil and Gas Sale, 25485 Fed Reg 8010, February 12, 2020. B, may update lease stipulations 1 through 3 and 10 described in the final notice of sale to reflect current conditions for lease sales conducted under subsections A1. C, shall set the royalty rate at not less than 12.5%, but not greater than 16 2/3%. D, shall for a lease in water depths of 800 meters or deeper issue as a result of a sale, set the primary term for 10 years. 2, terms and stipulations for Alaska region sales. A, in general. In conducting lease sales under subsection A2, the Secretary of the Interior shall offer the same lease form, lease terms, economic conditions, stipulations as contained in the final notice of sale of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management entitled Cook Inlet Planning Area, Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Lease Sale, 24482 Fed Reg 23291, May 22nd, 2017. B, revenue sharing, notwithstanding Section 8G and Section 9 of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, 43 U.S.C. 1337G 1338, and beginning in fiscal year 2034 of the bonuses, rents, royalties, and other revenues derived from lease sales conducted under subsection A2, 1, 70% shall be paid to the state of the Alaska, and 2, 30% shall be deposited in the Treasury and credited to miscellaneous receipts. 3, area offered for lease. A, Gulf of America region. For each offshore lease sale conducted under subsection A1, the Secretary of the Interior shall, 1, offer not fewer than 80 million acres, or 2, if there are fewer than 80 million acres that are unleased and available, offer all unleased and available acres. B, Alaska region. For each offshore lease sale conducted under subsection A2, the Secretary of the Interior shall, 1, offer not fewer than 1 million acres, or 2, if there are fewer than 1 million acres that are unleased and available, offer all unleased and available acres. C, offshore commingling. The Secretary of the Interior shall approve a request of an operator to commingle oil and gas production from multiple reservoirs within a single wellbore completed on the Outer Continental Shelf in the Gulf of America region unless the Secretary of the Interior determines that conclusive evidence establishes that the commingling would, 1, could not be conducted by the operator in a safe manner, or 2, would result in the ultimate recovery from the applicable reservoirs to be reduced in comparison to the expected recovery of those reservoirs if they had not been commingled. D, offshore oil and gas royalty rate. 1, repeal section 50261 of Public Law 117-169, 136-2056 is repealed, and any provision of law amended or repealed by that section is restored or revived as if that section had not been enacted into law. 2, royalty rate. Section 8A1 of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, 43 U.S.C. 1337A1, as amended by paragraph 1, is amended. A, in subparagraph A, by striking not less than 12.5% and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 16 2/3%. B, in subparagraph C, by striking not less than 12.5% and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 16 2/3%. C, in subparagraph F, by striking no less than 12.5% and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 16 2/3%. And D, in subparagraph H, by striking no less than 12.5% and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 16 2/3%. E, limitations on amount of distributed qualified Outer Continental Shelf revenues. Section 105F1 of the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act of 2006, 43 U.S.C. 1331, note Public Law 109-432, is amended. 1, in subparagraph B, by striking and at the end. 2, in subparagraph C, by striking 2055 and inserting 2024, and 3, by adding at the end the following. D, $650 million for each of fiscal years 2025 to 2034, and E, $500 million for each of fiscal years 2035 through 2055. Section 50103, royalties on extracted methane. Section 50263 of Public Law 117-169, 30 U.S.C. 1727 is repealed. Section 50104, Alaska oil and gas leasing. A, definitions. In this section, 1, coastal plain. The term coastal plain has the meaning given the term in Section 2001A of Public Law 115-97, 16 U.S.C. 3143 note. 2, oil and gas program. The term oil and gas program means the oil and gas programs established under Section 20001B2 of Public Law 115-97, 16 U.S.C. 3143 note. 3, secretary. The term secretary means the Secretary of the Interior acting through the Bureau of Land Management. B, lease sales required. 1, in general, subject to paragraph 3, in addition to the lease sales required under Section 20001C1A of Public Law 115-97, 16 U.S.C. 3143 note, the Secretary shall conduct not fewer than 4 lease sales area-wide under the oil and gas program by not later than 10 years after the date of the enactment of this act. 2, terms and conditions. In conducting lease sales under paragraph 1, the Secretary shall offer the same terms and conditions as contained in the record of decision described in the notice of availability of the Bureau of Land Management entitled Notice of Availability of the Record of Decision for the Final Environmental Impact Statement for the Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program, Alaska 85, Federal Register 51754, August 21, 2020. 3, sale acreage schedule. A, acreages. In conducting the lease sales required under paragraph 1, the Secretary shall offer for lease under the oil and gas program 1, not fewer than 400,000 acres area-wide in each lease sale, and 2, those areas that have the highest potential for the discovery of hydrocarbons. B, schedule. The Secretary shall offer 1, the initial lease sale under paragraph 1, not later than 1 year after the date of the enactment of this act. 2, a second lease sale under paragraph 1, not later than 3 years after the date of the enactment of this act. 3, a third lease sale under paragraph 1, not later than 5 years after the date of the enactment of this act. And 4, a fourth lease sale under the paragraph 1, not later than 7 years after the date of the enactment of this act. 4, rights of way. Section 20001C2 of Public Law 115-97, 16 U.S.C. 3143 note shall apply to leases awarded under this subsection. 5, surface development. Section 20001C3 of Public Law 115-97, 16 U.S.C. 3143 note shall apply to leases awarded under this subsection. C, receipts. Notwithstanding Section 35 of the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 191, and Section 20001 B5 of Public Law 115-97, 16 U.S.C. 3143 note of the amount adjusted bonus, rental, and royalty receipts derived from the oil and gas program operations on the coastal plain pursuant to this section. 1A, for each of fiscal years 2025 through 2033, 50% shall be paid to the state of Alaska, and B, for the fiscal year 2034, each fiscal year thereafter, 70% shall be paid to the state of Alaska, and 2, the balance shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. Section 50105, National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. A, definitions. In this section, 1, NPRA, Final Environmental Impact Statement. The term NPRA, Final Environmental Impact Statement, means the final environmental impact statement published by the Bureau of Land Management entitled National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, Integrated Activity Plan Final Environmental Impact Statement, and dated June 2020, including the errata sheet dated October 6, 2020, and excluding the errata sheet dated September 20th, 2022.
2, NPRA, Record of Decision. The term NPRA, Record of Decision, means the record of decision published by the Bureau of Land Management entitled National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, Integrated Activity Plan Record of Decision, and dated December 2020. 3, Program. The term program means the competitive oil and gas leasing, exploration, development, and production program established under Section 107 of the Naval Petroleum Reserves Reduction Act of 1976, 42 U.S.C. 6506A. 4, Secretary. The term Secretary means the Secretary of the Interior. B, restoration of NPRA oil and gas leasing program, effective beginning on the date of enactment of this act. 1, the Secretary shall expeditiously restore and resume oil and gas lease sales under the program for domestic energy production and federal revenue, subject to the requirements of this section. And 2, the final rule of the Bureau of Land Management entitled Management and Protection of the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, 89 Fed Reg 38712, May 7, 2024, shall have no force or effect until January 1, 2035. C, resumption of MPRA lease sales. 1, in general, subject to paragraph 2, the Secretary shall conduct not fewer than 5 lease sales under the program by not later than 10 years after the date of enactment of this act. 2, sales acreages schedule A, acreages. In conducting the lease sales required under paragraph 1, the Secretary shall offer not fewer than 4 million acres in each sale. B, schedule. The Secretary shall offer I, an initial lease sale under paragraph 1 not later than 1 year after the date of enactment of this act, and II, an additional lease sale under paragraph 1 not later than every 2 years after the date of enactment of this act. D, terms and stipulations for MPRA lease sales. In conducting lease sales under subsection C, the Secretary shall offer the same lease form, lease terms, economic conditions, and stipulations as described in MPRA Final Environmental Impact Statement and the MPRA Record of Decision. C, receipts. Section 107I of the Naval Petroleum Reserves Reduction Act of 1976, 42 U.S.C. 6506A1, is amended. 1, by striking all receipts from and inserting the following. 1, in general, except as provided in paragraph 2, all receipts from. 2, by adding at the end the following, 2% share for fiscal year 2034 and thereafter. Beginning in fiscal year 2034, the receipts from sales, rentals, bonuses, and royalties on leases issued pursuant to the section after the date of enactment of the act entitled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation pursuant to Title II of H. Con. Res. 14, 119th Congress. A, 70% shall be paid to the state of Alaska, and B, 30% shall be paid into Treasury of the United States. Subtitle B, mining. Section 50201, coal leasing. A, definitions. In this section, 1, coal lease. The term coal lease means a lease entered into by the United States as a lessor through the Bureau of Land Management and an applicant on Bureau of Land Management Form 3400012 or a successor form that contains the terms of a coal lease. 2, qualified application. The term qualified application means an application for a coal lease pending as of the date of enactment of this act or submitted within 90 days thereafter under the lease by application program administered by the Bureau of Land Management pursuant to Mineral Leasing Act 30 U.S.C. 181 et sec, for which any required environmental review is commenced or the Director of the Bureau of Land Management determines can commence within 90 days after receiving the application. B, coal leasing activities. Not later than 90 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary of the Interior, 1, shall, A, with respect to each qualified application, 1, if not previously published for public comment, publish any required environmental review. 2, establish the fair market value of the applicable coal tract. 3, hold a lease sale with respect to the applicable coal tract. 4, identify the highest bidder or at above the fair market value and take all other intermediate actions necessary to identify the winning bidder and grant the qualified application. And 2, may, A, with respect to a previously issued coal lease, grant any additional approvals of the Department of the Interior required for mining activities to commence, and B, after completing the actions required by clause I through 4 of paragraph 1A, grant the qualified application and issue that applicable lease to the person that submitted the qualified application if that person submitted the winning bid in the lease sale held under clause 3 of paragraph 1A. Section 50202, coal royalty. A, rate. Section 7A of the Mineral Leasing Act 30 U.S.C. 207A is amended in the fourth sentence by striking 12.5% and inserting 12.5%, except such amounts shall not be more than 7% during the period that begins on the date of enactment of the act entitled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation pursuant to Title II of H. Con. Res. 14, 119th Congress and ends September 30th, 2034. B, applicability to existing leases. The amendment made by subsection A shall apply to a coal lease, 1, issued under Section 2 of the Mineral Leasing Act 30 U.S.C. 201 before, on, or after the date of enactment of this act, and 2, that has not been terminated. C, advanced royalties. With respect to a lease issued under Section 2 of the Mineral Leasing Act 30 U.S.C. 201, for which the leasee has paid advanced royalties under Section 7B of that act, 30 U.S.C. 207B, the Secretary of the Interior shall provide to the leasee a credit for the difference between the amount paid by the leasing and advanced royalties for the lease before the date of the enactment of this act and the amount the leasee would have to be repaid if the amendment made by subsection A had been made before the leasee paid advanced royalties for the lease. Section 50203, leases for known recoverable coal resources. notwithstanding Section 2A3A of the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 201A3A, and Section 202A of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1712A, not later than 90 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary of the Interior shall make available for lease known recoverable coal resources of not less than 4 million additional acres on federal land located in the 48 contiguous states in Alaska, subject to the jurisdiction of the Secretary, but which shall not include any federal land within 1, a national monument, 2, a national recreation area, 3, a component of the National Wilderness Preservation System, 4, a component of the National Wild and Scenic River System, 5, a component of the National Trail System, 6, a National Conservation Area, 7, a unit of the National Wildlife Refuge System, 8, a unit of the National Fish Hatchery System, or 9, a unit of the National Park System. Section 50204, authorization to mine federal coal. Authorization in order to provide access to coal reserves in adjacent state or private land that, without an authorization, could not be mined economically. Federal coal reserves located in federal land, subject to a mining plan previously approved by the Secretary of the Interior as of the date of enactment of this act, and adjacent to coal reserves in adjacent state or private land are authorized to be mined. B, requirement. Not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of the Interior shall, without substantial modification, take such steps as are necessary to authorize the mining of federal land described in subsection A. C, NEPA. Nothing in this section shall prevent a review under the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, 42 U.S.C. 4321 et sec. Subtitle C, lands. Section 50302, timber sales and long-term contracting for the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. A, Forest Service. Definitions in this subsection. A, forest plan. A term forest plan means a land and resource management plan prepared by the Secretary for a unit of the National Forest System pursuant to Section 6 of the Forest and Rangeland Renewable Resources Planning Act of 1974, 16 U.S.C. 1604. B, National Forest System. 1, in general, the term National Forest System means land of the National Forest System as defined in Section 11A of the Forest and Rangeland Renewable Resources Planning Act of 1974, 16 U.S.C. 1609A, administered by the Secretary. 2, exclusions. The term National Forest System does not include any forest reserve not created from the public domain. C, Secretary. The term Secretary means the Secretary of Agriculture acting through the Chief of the Forest Service. 2, timber sales on public domain forest reserves. A, in general, for each of fiscal years 2026 through 2034, the Secretary shall sell timber annually on National Forest System land in a total quantity that is not less than 250 million board feet greater than the quantity of board feet sold in the previous fiscal year. B, limitation. The timber sales under subparagraph A shall be subject to the maximum allowable sale quality of timber and projected timber sale quality under the applicable forest plan in effect on the date of enactment of this act. 3, long-term contracting for the Forest Service. A, long-term contracting. For the period of fiscal years 2025 through 2034, the Secretary shall enter into not fewer than 40 long-term timber sale contracts with private persons or other public-private entities under subsection A of Section 14 of the National Forest Management Act of 1976, 16 U.S.C. 472A, for the sale of national forest materials as defined in subsection E1 of that section in the National Forest System. B, contract length. The period of a timber sale contract entered into meet the requirement under subparagraph A shall be not less than 20 years, with options for extensions or renewals as determined by the Secretary. C, receipts. Any monies derived from the timber sale contract entered into meet the requirements under subparagraphs A and B shall be deposited in the general fund of the Treasury. B, Bureau of Land Management. 1, definitions in this subsection. A, public lands. The term public lands has the meaning given term in Section 103 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1702. B, resource management plan. The term resource management plan means a land use plan prepared for public lands under Section 202 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1712. C, Secretary. The term Secretary means the Secretary of the Interior acting through the Director of the Bureau of Land Management. 2, timber sales on public land. A, in general, for each of fiscal years 2026 through 2034, the Secretary shall sell timber annually on public lands in a total quantity that is not less than 20 million board feet greater than the quantity of board feet sold in the previous year. B, limitation. The timber sales under subparagraph A shall be subject to the applicable resource management plan in effect on a date of enactment of this act. 3, long-term contracting for the Bureau of Land Management. A, long-term contracting. For the period of fiscal years 2025 through 2034, the Secretary shall enter into not fewer than 5 long-term contracts with private persons or other public or private entities under Section 1 of the Act of July 31st, 1947, commonly known as the Materials Act of 1947, 61 Stat 681, Chapter 406, 30 U.S.C. 601, for the disposal of vegetative materials described in that section on public lands. B, contract length. The period of a contract entered into to meet the requirement under subparagraph A shall be not less than 20 years with options for extensions or renewals as determined by the Secretary. C, receipts. Any monies derived from a contract entered into to meet the requirements under subparagraphs A and B shall be deposited in the general fund of the Treasury. Section 50303, renewable energy fees on federal land. A, definitions in this section. 1, annual adjustment factor. The term annual adjustment factor means 3%. 2, encumbrance factor. The term encumbrance factor means A, 100% for a solar energy generation facility, and B, an amount determined by the Secretary but not less than 10% for a wind energy generation facility. 3, national forest system. A, in general, the term national forest system means land of the national forest system as defined in Section 11A of the Forest and Rangeland Renewable Resources Planning Act of 1974, 16 U.S.C. 1609A, administered by the Secretary of Agriculture. B, exclusion. The term national forest system does not include any forest reserve not created from the public domain. 4, per acre rate. The term per acre rate with respect to a right-of-way means the average of the per acre pasture land rental rates published in the cash rent survey by the National Agricultural Statistics Service for the state in which the right-of-way is located over the 5 calendar year period preceding the issuance or renewal of the right-of-way. 5, project. The term project means a system described in Section 2801.9A4 of Title 43, Code of Federal Regulations, as in effect on the date of enactment of this act. 6, public land. The term public land means A, public lands as defined in Section 103 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1702, and B, national forest system land. 7, renewable energy project. The term renewable energy project means a project located on public land that uses wind or solar energy to generate energy. 8, right-of-way. The term right-of-way has the meaning given the term Section 103 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1702. 9, secretary. The term secretary means A, Secretary of the Interior with respect to land controlled or administered by the Secretary of the Interior, and B, the Secretary of Agriculture with respect to national forest system land. B, acreage rent for wind and solar rights-of-way. 1, in general, pursuant to Section 504G of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1764G, the Secretary shall, subject to paragraph 3 and not later than January 1 of each calendar year, collect from the holder of a right-of-way for a renewable energy project an acreage rent in an amount determined by the equation described in paragraph 2. 2, calculation of acreage rent rate. A, equation. The amount of acreage rent collected under paragraph 1 shall be determined using the following equation. Acreage rent equals A times B times 1 plus C D squared. B, definitions. For purposes of the equation described in subparagraph A, 1, the letter A means per acre rate. 2, the letter B means the encumbrance factor. 3, the letter C means the annual adjustment factor. 4, the letter D means the year and the term of right-of-way. 3, payment until production. The holder of a right-of-way for renewable energy projects shall pay an acreage rent collected under paragraph 1 until the date of which energy generation begins. C, capacity fees. In general, the Secretary shall, subject to paragraph 3, annually collect a capacity fee from the holder of a right-of-way for a renewable energy project based on the amount described in paragraph 2. 2, calculation of capacity fee. The amount of a capacity fee collected under paragraph 1 shall be equal to the greater of A, an amount equal to the acreage rent described in subsection B, and B, 3.9% of the gross proceeds from the sale of electricity produced by the renewable energy project. 3, multiple use reduction factor. A, application. The holder of a right-of-way for a wind energy generation project may request that the Secretary apply a multiple use reduction factor of 10% to the amount of a capacity fee determined under paragraph 2 by submitting to the Secretary an application at such time in such manner and containing such information as the Secretary may require. B, approval. The Secretary may approve an application submitted under some paragraph A, only if not less than 25% of the land within the area of the right-of-way is authorized for use, occupancy, or development with respect to an activity other than the generation of wind energy for the entirety of the year in which the capacity fee is collected. C, late determination. 1, in general, if the Secretary approves an application under subparagraph B for a wind energy generation project after the date on which the holder of the right-of-way for the project begins paying a capacity fee, the Secretary shall apply the multiple use reduction factor described in subparagraph A to the capacity fee for the first year beginning after the date of approval and each year thereafter for the period during which the right-of-way remains in effect. 2, refund. Secretary may not refund the holder of a right-of-way for the difference in the amount of a capacity fee paid in a previous year. D, late payment fee termination. 1, in general, the Secretary may charge the holder of a right-of-way for a renewable energy project a late payment fee if the Secretary does not receive payment for the acreage rent under subsection B or the capacity fee under subsection C by the date that is 15 days after the date on which the payment was due. 2, termination of right-of-way. The Secretary may terminate a right-of-way for a renewable energy project if the Secretary does not receive payment for the acreage rent under subsection B of the capacity fee under subsection C by the date that is 90 days after the date on which payment was due. Section 50304, renewable energy revenue sharing. A, definitions. In this section, 1, county. The term county includes a parish, township, borough, and others similar independent unit of local government. 2, covered land. The term covered land means that land that is A, public land administered by the Secretary, and B, not excluded from the development of solar or wind energy under 1, a land use plan, or 2, other federal law. 3, national forest system. A, in general, the term national forest system means land of the national forest system as defined in Section 11A of the Forest and Rangeland Renewable Resources Planning Act of 1974, 16 U.S.C. 1609A, administered by the Secretary of Agriculture. B, exclusion. The term national forest system does not include any forest reserve not created from the public domain. 4, public land. The term public land means A, public lands as defined in Section 103 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, 43 U.S.C. 1702, and B, national forest system land. 5, renewable energy project. The term renewable energy project means a system described in Section 2801.9A4 of Title 43, Code of Federal Regulations, as in effect on the date of enactment of this act, located on covered land that uses wind or solar energy to generate energy. 6, secretary. The term secretary means A, the Secretary of the Interior with respect to land controlled or administered by the Secretary of the Interior, and B, the Secretary of Agriculture with respect to the National Forest System land. B, disposition of revenue. 1, disposition of revenues. Beginning on January 1, 2026, the amounts collected from a renewable energy project as bonus bids, rentals, fees, or other payments under a right-of-way permit, lease, or other authorization shall, A, be deposited in the general fund of the Treasury, and B, without further appropriation for fiscal year limitation, has allocated as follows. 1, 25% shall be paid from amounts in the general fund of the Treasury to the state within the boundaries of which the revenue is derived. 2, 25% shall be paid from amounts in the general fund of the Treasury to each county and estate within the boundaries of which the revenue is derived, to be allocated among each applicable county based on the percentage of county land from which the revenue is derived. 2, payments to states and counties. A, in general, amounts paid to states and counties under paragraph 1 shall be used in accordance with the requirements of Section 35 of the Mineral Leasing Act, 30 U.S.C. 191. B, payments in lieu of taxes. A payment to a county under paragraph 1 shall be in addition to a payment in lieu of taxes received by the county under Chapter 69 of Title 31 United States Code. C, timing. The amounts required to be paid under paragraph 1B for an applicable fiscal year shall be made available for the fiscal year that immediately follows fiscal year for which the amounts were collected. Section 50305, rescission of National Park Service and Bureau of Land Management funds. There are rescinded the unobligated balances of amounts made available by the following sections of Public Law 117-169, commonly known as the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, 136 Statute 1818. 1, Section 50221, 136 Statute 2052. 2, Section 50221, 136 Statute 2052. 3, Section 50223, 136 Statute 2052. Section 50306, celebrating America's 250th anniversary. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of the Interior, acting through the Director of the National Park Service, for fiscal year 2025, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $150 million for events, celebrations, and activities surrounding the observance and commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States to remain available through fiscal year 2028. Subtitle D, Energy. Section 50401, Strategic Petroleum Reserve. A, Energy Policy and Conservation Act definitions. In this section, the terms related facility, storage facility, and strategic petroleum reserve have the meanings given those terms in Section 152 of the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, 42 U.S.C. 6232. B, appropriations. In addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Energy for fiscal year 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated to remain available until September 30th, 2029. $218 million for maintenance of, including repairs to storage facilities and related facilities of Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and to $171 million to acquire by purchase petroleum products for storage in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. C, repeal of Strategic Petroleum Reserve drawdown and sale mandate. Section 200003 of Public Law 115-97, 42 U.S.C. 6241, note, is repealed. Section 50402, repeals, rescissions. A, repeal and rescission. Section 50142 of Public Law 117-169, 163, Statute 2044, commonly known as the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, is repealed, and the unobligated balance of amounts made available under that section as in effect on the day before the date of enactment of this act is rescinded. B, rescissions. 1, in general, the unobligated balances of amounts made available under the sections described in paragraph 2 are rescinded. 2, sections described. The sections referred to in paragraph 1 are the following sections of Public Law 117-179, commonly known as the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. A, section 50123, 42 U.S.C. 1879B5. B, section 50141, 136, statute 2042. C, section 50144, 136, statute 2044. D, section 50145, 136, stat 2045. E, section 50151, 42 U.S.C. 18715. 5, F, section 50152, 42 U.S.C. 18715A. G, section 50153, 42 U.S.C. 18715B. H, section 50161, 42 U.S.C. 17113B. Section 50403, energy dominance financing. A, in general, section 1706 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, 42 U.S.C. 16517, is amended, 1, in subsection A in paragraph 1 by striking or at the end, B, in paragraph 2 by striking avoid, and all that follows to the period at the end and insert increased capacity or output, or, and C, by adding at the end of the following. 3, support or enable the provision of known or forecastable electric supply at time intervals necessary to maintain or enhance grid reliability or other system adequacy needs. 2, by striking subsection C. 3, by redesignating subsections D through F as subsections C through E, respectively. 4, in subsection C, as so redesignated. A, in paragraph 1 by adding and at the end. B, by striking paragraph 2, and C, by redesignating paragraph 3 as paragraph 2. 5, in subsection E, as so redesignated, by striking 4 in the matter preceding paragraph 1, and all that follows to the period at the end of the paragraph 2, and inserting 4, enabling the identification, leasing, development, production, processing, transportation, transmission, refining, and generation needed for energy and critical minerals, and 6, by adding at the end of the following F, funding. I, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal years 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $1 trillion to remain available through September 30, 2028 to carry out activities under the section. 2, administrative costs of the amount made available under paragraph 1. The Secretary shall not use more than 3% for administrative expenses. B, commitment authority, section 50144B of Public Law 117-169, commonly known as the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. 136, stat 2045 is amended by striking 2026 and inserting 2028. Section 50404, transformational artificial intelligence models. A, definitions in this section. 1, American Science Cloud. The term American Science Cloud means a system of United States government, academic, and private sector programs and infrastructures utilizing cloud computing technologies to facilitate and support scientific research, data sharing, and computational analysis across various disciplines while ensuring compliance with applicable legal, regulatory, and privacy standards. 2, artificial intelligence. The term artificial intelligence has the meaning given term in section 5002 of the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act of 2020, 15 U.S.C. 9401. B, transformational models. The Secretary of Energy shall, 1, mobilize national laboratories to partner with industry sectors within the United States to curate the scientific data of the Department of Energy across the national laboratory complex so that the data is structured, cleaned, and pre-processed in a way that makes it suitable for use in artificial intelligence and machine learning models. And 2, initiate seed efforts for self-improving artificial intelligence models for science and engineering powered by the data described in paragraph 1. C, uses. Microelectronics. The curated data described in subsection B1 may be used to rapidly develop next-generation microelectronics that have greater capabilities beyond Moore's law while requiring lower energy consumption. 2, new energy technologies. The artificial intelligence models developed under subsection B2 shall be provided to the scientific community through the American Science Cloud to accelerate innovation in discovery, science, and engineering for new energy technologies. D, appropriations. There is appropriated out of any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $150 million to remain available through September 30th, 2026 to carry out this section. Subtitle E, water. Section 50501, water conveyance and surface water storage enhancement. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of the Interior acting through the Commissioner of Reclamation for fiscal year 2025 on any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $1 billion to remain available through September 30th, 2034 for construction and associated activities that restore or increase the capacity or use of existing conveyance facilities constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation, or for construction and associated activities that increase the capacity of existing Bureau of Reclamation surface water storage facilities in a manner as determined by the Secretary of the Interior acting through the Commissioner of Reclamation, provided that for the purposes of Section 203 of the Reclamation Reform Act of 1982, 43 U.S.C. 390cc, or Section 3404A of the Reclamation Projects Authorization and Adjustment Act of 1992, Public Law 102-575, 106 Stat 4708, a contract or agreement entered into pursuant to this section shall not be treated as a new or amended contract, provided further that none of the funds provided under this section shall be reimbursable or subject to matching or cost-sharing requirements. Title VI, Committee on Environment and Public Works, Section 60001, rescission of funding for clean heavy-duty vehicles. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 132 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7432, are rescinded. Section 60002, repeal of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Section 134 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7434, is repealed, and the unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out that section as in effect on the day before the date of enactment of this act are rescinded. Section 60003, rescission of funding for diesel emissions reductions. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60104 of Public Law 117-169, 136.2067 are rescinded. Section 60004, rescission of funding to address air pollution. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60105 of Public Law 117-169, 136.2067 are rescinded. Section 60005, rescission of funding to address air pollution at schools. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60106 of Public Law 117-169, 136.2069 are rescinded. Section 60006, rescission of funding for the Low Emissions Electricity Program. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 135 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7435 are rescinded. Section 6007, rescission of funding for Section 2110 of the Clean Air Act. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60108 of Public Law 117-169, 136.2070 are rescinded. Section 60008, rescission of funding for implementation of the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60109 of Public Law 117-169, 136.2071 are rescinded.
Section 60009, rescission of funding for enforcement technology and public information. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60110 of Public Law 117-169, 136.2071 are rescinded. Section 60010, rescission of funding for greenhouse gas Barrett reporting the unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out 60111 of Public Law 117-169-136 Stat 2072 are rescinded. Section 60011, rescission of funding for environmental product declaration assistance, the unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60112 of Public Law 117-169, 42 U.S.C. 4321, Note 136, Stat 2072 are rescinded. Section 60012, rescission of funding for methane emissions and waste reduction incentive program for petroleum and natural gas systems. A, rescission. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out subsections A and B of Section 136 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7436 are rescinded. B, period. Section 136G of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7436G is amended by striking calendar year 2024 and inserting calendar year 2034. Section 60013, rescission of funding for greenhouse gas air pollution plans and implementation grants. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 137 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7437 are rescinded. Section 60014, rescission of funding for Environmental Protection Agency, efficient, accurate, and timely reviews. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60115 of Public Law 117-169, 136 Stat 2077 are rescinded. Section 60015, rescission of funding for low embodied carbon labeling for construction materials. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60116 of Public Law 117-169, 42 U.S.C. 432, Note 136, Stat 2077 are rescinded. Section 60016, rescission of funding for environmental and climate justice block grants. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 138 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7438 are rescinded. Section 60017, rescission of funding for ESA recovery plans. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60301 of Public Law 117-169, 136 Stat 2079 are rescinded. Section 60018, rescission of funding for environmental and climate data collection. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out 60401 of Public Law 117-169, 136 Stat 2079 are rescinded. Section 60019, rescission of neighborhood access and equity grant program. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 177 of Title 23 United States Code are rescinded. Section 60020, rescission of funding for federal building assistance. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60502 of Public Law 117-169, 136 Stat 2083 are rescinded. Section 60021, rescission of funding for low-carbon materials for federal buildings. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 60503 of Public Law 117-169, 136 Stat 2083 are rescinded. Section 60022, rescission of funding for GSA emerging and sustainable technologies. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out 60504 of Public Law 117-169, 136 Stat 2083 are rescinded. Section 60023, rescission of environmental review implementation funds. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 178 of Title 23 United States Code are rescinded. Section 60024, rescission of low-carbon transportation material grants. The unobligated balances of amounts made available to carry out Section 179 of Title 23 United States Code are rescinded. Section 60025, John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. In general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriate for fiscal year 2025 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $256,657,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2029 for necessary expenses for capital repair, restoration, maintenance, backlog, and security structures of the building site and site of the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. B, administrative costs. Of the amounts made available under subsection A, not more than 3% may be used for administrative costs necessary to carry out this section. Section 60026, project sponsor, opt-in fees for environmental reviews. Title I of the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, 42 U.S.C. 4331 at sequence is amended by adding the end the following. Section 112, project sponsor opt-in fees for environmental reviews. A, process. 1, Project sponsor. A project sponsor that intends to pay a fee under the section for the preparation or supervision of the preparation of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement for a project shall submit to the council a description of the project, and b, a declaration of whether the project sponsor intends to prepare the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement under section 10(7)(f). 2, Council of Environmental Quality. Note, not later than 15 days after the date on which the council receives information described in paragraph 1 from a project sponsor, the council shall provide to the project sponsor notice of the amount of the fee to be paid under this section as determined under subsection B. 3, payment of fee. A project sponsor may pay a fee under this section after the receipt of the notice described in paragraph 2. 4, deadline for environmental reviews for which a fee is paid. Notwithstanding section 107G1A, an environmental assessment for which a fee is paid under the section shall be completed not later than 180 days after the date on which the fee is paid. And B, an environmental impact statement for which a fee is paid under the section shall be completed not later than 1 year after the date of publication of the notice of the intent to prepare the environmental impact statement. B, fee amount. The amount of a fee under the section shall be 1, 125% of the anticipated cost to prepare the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. And 2, in the case of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement to be prepared in whole or in part by a project sponsor under section 107F, 125% of the anticipated cost to supervise preparation of and, as applicable, prepare the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. Title 7, Finance, Subtitle A, Tax, Section 70001, references to the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, etc. A, references. Except as otherwise expressly provided whenever in this title an amendment or repeal is expressed in terms of an amendment to or repeal of a section or other provision, the reference shall be considered to be made to a section or other provision of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. B, certain rules regarding effect of rate changes not applicable. Section 15 of the International Revenue Code of 1986 shall not apply to any change in rate of tax by reason of any provision of or amendment made by this title. Chapter 1, providing permanent tax relief for middle-class families and workers. Section 70101, extension and enhancement of reduced rates. A, in general, Section 1J is amended. 1, in paragraph 1 by striking and before January 1, 2026, and 2, by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, inflation adjustment. Section 1J3BI is amended by inserting solely for the purpose is of determining the dollar amounts at which any rate bracket higher than 12% ends and at which any rate bracket higher than 22% begins before subsection F3. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall be applied to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70102, extension and enhancement of increased standard reduction. A, in general, Section 63C7 is amended 1, by striking and before January 1st, 2026 in the matter preceding subparagraph A, and 2, by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, additional increase in standard deduction. Paragraph 7 of Section 63C is amended 1, by striking $18,000, both places it appears in subparagraphs AI and BII, and inserting $23,625. 2, by striking $12,000, both places it appears in subparagraphs AII and BII, and inserting $15,750. 3, by striking 2018 in subparagraph BII and inserting 2025. And 4, by striking 2017 in subparagraph BII and inserting 2024. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2024. Section 70103, termination of deduction for personal exemptions other than temporary senior deduction. A, in general, Section 151D5 is amended 1, by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. 2, by striking and before January 1st, 2026. And 3, by adding at the end the following new subparagraph. C, deductions for seniors. I, in general, in the case of a taxable year beginning before January 1st, 2029, there shall be allowed a deduction in an amount equal to $6,000 for each qualified individual with respect to the taxpayer. II, qualified individual. For purposes of Clause I, the term qualified individual means I, the taxpayer, if the taxpayer has attained age 65 before the close of the taxable year, and II, in the case of a joint return, the taxpayer's spouse, if such spouse has attained age 65 before the close of the taxable year. III, limitation based on modified adjusted gross income. I, in general, in the case of any taxpayer for any taxable year. The $6,000 amount in Clause I shall be reduced, but not below zero, by 6% of so much of that taxpayer's modified adjusted gross income as exceeds $75,000, $150,000 in the case of a joint return. II, modified adjustment gross income. For the purpose of this clause, the term modified adjusted gross income means the adjusted gross income of the taxpayer for the taxable year increased by any amount excluded from gross income under sections 911, 931, or 933. For Social Security number required, 1, in general clause, I shall not apply with respect to a qualified individual unless the taxpayer includes such qualified individual Social Security number on the return of tax for the taxable year. 2, Social Security number. For the purpose is of subclause 1, the term Social Security number has the meaning given such term in section 24H7. 5, married individuals. If the taxpayer is a married individual within this meaning of section 7703, this subparagraph shall apply only if the taxpayer and the taxpayer's spouse file a joint return for the taxable year. B, omission of correct Social Security number treated as mathematical or clerical error. Section 6213G2 is amended by striking and at the end of subparagraph U, by striking the period at the end of subparagraph V and inserting and by inserting after subparagraph V the following new subparagraph W. An omission of a correct Social Security number required under section 151D5C relating to deduction for seniors. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2024. Section 70104, extension and enhancement of increased child tax credit. A, extension and increase of expanded child tax credit. Section 24H is amended, 1, in paragraph 1 by striking and before January 1st, 2026. 2, in paragraph 2 by striking $2,000 and inserting $2,200, and 3, by striking 2018 through 2025 and in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, Social Security number required. Section 24H7 is amended to read as follows. 7, Social Security number required. A, in general, no credit shall be allowed under the section to a taxpayer with respect to any qualifying child unless the taxpayer includes on the return of the tax for the taxable year 1, the taxpayer's Social Security number, or in the case of a joint return, the Social Security number of at least one spouse, and 2, the Social Security number of such qualifying child. B, Social Security number. For the purposes of this paragraph, the term Social Security number means any Social Security number issued to an individual by the Social Security Administration, but only if the Social Security number is issued, 1, to a citizen of the United States or pursuant to subclause I or that portion of subclause III that relates to subclause I of section 205C2BI of the Social Security Act, and 2, before the due date for such return. C, inflation adjustments. In general, section 24I is amended to read as follows. I, inflation adjustments. 1, maximum amount of refundable credit. In the case of a taxable year beginning after 2024, the $1,400 amount in subsection H5 shall be increased by an amount equal to A, such dollar amount multiplied by B, the cost of living adjustment determined under section 1F3 for the calendar year in which the taxable year begins, determined by substituting 2017 for 2016 in subparagraph A, II thereof. 2, special rule for adjustment of credit amount. In the case of a taxable year beginning after 2025, the $2,200 amount in subsection H2 shall be increased by an amount equal to A, such dollar amount multiplied by B, the cost of living adjustment determined under section 1F3 for the calendar year in which the taxable year begins, determined by substituting 2024 for 2016 in subparagraph A, II thereof. 3, rounding. If any increase under the subsection is not a multiple of $100, such increase shall be rounded to the next lowest multiple of $100. D, conforming amendment. Section 24H5 is amended to read as follows. 5, maximum amount of refundable credit. The amount determined under subsection D1A with respect to any qualifying child shall not exceed $1,400, and such subsection shall appear without regard to paragraph 4 of this subsection. E, omission of correct Social Security number treated as mathematical or clerical error. Section 6213G2I is amended by striking section 24E and inserting section 24F, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2024. Section 70105, extension and enhancement of deduction for qualified business income. A, increase in taxable income limitation phase-in amounts. 1, in general. Subparagraph B of section 199AB3 is amended by striking $50,000, $100,000 in case of a joint return. Each place it appears and inserting $75,000, $150,000 in the case of a joint return. 2, conforming amendment. Paragraph 3 of section 199AD is amended by striking $50,000, $100,000 in the case of a joint return, each place it appears, and inserting $75,000, $150,000 in the case of a joint return. B, minimum deduction for active qualified business income. 1, in general, subsection I of section 199A is amended to read as follows. I, minimum deduction for active qualified business income. 1, in general, in the case of an applicable taxpayer for any taxable year, the deduction allowed under subsection A for the taxable year shall be equal to the greater of A, the amount of such deduction determined without regard to the subsection, or B, $400. 2, applicable taxpayer. For the purpose is of this subsection A, in general, the term applicable taxpayer means with respect to any taxable year, a taxpayer whose aggregate qualified business income with respect to all active qualified trades or businesses of the taxpayer for such taxable years at least $1,000. B, active qualified trade or business. The active qualified trade or business means with respect to any taxpayer for any taxable year, any qualified trade or business of the taxpayer in which the taxpayer materially participates within the meaning of section 469H. 3, inflation adjustment. In the case of any taxable year beginning after 2026, the $400 amount in paragraph 1B and the $1,000 amount in paragraph 2A shall be increased by an amount equal to A, such dollar amount multiplied by B, the cost of living adjustment determined under section 1F3 for the calendar year in which the taxable year begins, determined by substituting calendar year 2025 for calendar year 2016 in subparagraph A, II thereof. If any increase under this paragraph is not a multiple of 5, such increase shall be rounded to the nearest multiple of $5. 2, conforming amendment. Section 199AA is amended by inserting except as provided in subsection I before it there. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70106, extension and enhancement of increased estate and gift tax exemption amounts. A, in general. Subsection 2010C3 is amended 1, in subparagraph A by striking $5 million and inserting $15 million. 2, in subparagraph B, A, in the matter preceding clause I by striking 2011 and inserting 2026, and B in clause II by striking calendar year 2010 and inserting calendar year 2025, and 3 by striking subparagraph C. B, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to estates of decedents dying and gifts made after December 31st, 2025. Section 70107, extension of increased alternative minimum tax exemption amounts and modification of phase-out thresholds. A, in general, section 55D4 is amended 1 in subparagraph A by striking and before January 1st, 2026, and 2 by striking and before 2026 in the heading. B, modification of inflation adjustment. Section 55D4B is amended 1 by striking 2018 and inserting 2018-2026 in the case of $1 million, amount in subparagraph AIII, and 2 by striking determined by substituting calendar year 2017 for calendar year 2016 in subparagraph AII thereof, and inserting determined by substituting for calendar year 2016 in subparagraph AII thereof. 1, calendar year 2017 in the case of $109,400 amount in subparagraph AII, and the $70,300 amount in subparagraph AIII, and 2, calendar year 2025 in the case of $1 million amount in subparagraph AIII. C, modification of phase-out amount. Section 55D4AII is amended by striking and at the end of subclause II and by adding at the end of the following new subclause. 4, by substituting 50% for 25%, and D, effective date. The amendments made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70108, extension and modification of limitation on deduction for qualified resident interest. A, in general, section 163H3F is amended 1 in clause I, A, by striking and before January 1st, 2026. B, by redesignated subclauses 3 and 4 as subclauses 4 and 5 respectively. C, by striking out subclauses 3 and subclause 5 as so redesignated and inserting subclause 4. And D, by inserting after subclause 2 the following new subclause 3, mortgage insurance premiums treated as interest. Clause 4 of subparagraph E shall not apply. 2, by striking clauses 2 and redesignated clauses 3 and 4 as clauses 2 and 3 respectively, and 3 by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, effective date. The amendment made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70109, extension and modification of limitation on casualty loss deduction. In general, section 165H5 is amended 1 in subparagraph A by striking and before January 1st, 2026, and 2 by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, extension to state declared disasters. 1 in general, subparagraph A of section 165H5 is amended by subsection A is further amended by striking I5 and inserting I5 or a state declared disaster. 2, exception related to personal casualty gains. Clause I of Section 165H5B is amended by striking as so defined and inserting as so defined or a state declared disaster. 3, state declared disaster. Paragraph 5 of Section 165H is amended by adding at the end the following new subparagraph. C, state declared disaster for the purpose is of this paragraph. 1, in general, the term state declared disaster means with respect to any state, any natural catastrophe, including any hurricane, tornado, storm, high water, wind-driven water, tidal wave, tsunami, earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide, mudslide, snowstorm, or drought, or regardless of case, any fire, flood, or explosion in any part of the state, which in the determination of the governor of such state or mayor in the case of the District of Columbia and the secretary causes damage of sufficient severity and magnitude to warrant the application of the rules of this section. 2, state. The term state includes the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. 70110, termination of miscellaneous itemized deductions other than educator expenses. A, in general, Section 67G is amended by striking and before January 1st, 2026, and 2, by striking 2018 through 2025, the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, deduction for educator expenses. 1, in general, Section 67B is amended by striking and at the end of paragraph 11, by striking the period at the end of paragraph 12, and inserting and by adding the following new paragraph. 13, the deductions allowed by Section 162 for educator expenses as defined in subsection G. 2, inclusion of coaches and certain non-athletic instructional equipment. Section 67 is amended by redesignated subsection G as amended by the section as subsection H and by inserting after subsection F the following new section. G, educator expenses for the purpose of subsection B13. The term educator expenses means expenses of a type which would be described in section 62A2D if 1, such section were applied, A, without regard to dollar limitation, and B, without regard to other than non-athletic supplies for courses of instruction in health or physical education in clause 2 thereof, and C, by substituting as part of instructional activity for in the classroom in clause 2 thereof, and 2, section 62D1A, where were applied to inserting interscholastic sports administrator or coach after counselor. C, effective date. The amendments made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70111, limitation on tax benefit of itemized deductions. A, in general, Section 68 is amended to read as follows. A, in general, in the case of an individual, the amount of the itemized deductions otherwise allowable for the taxable year determined without regard to this section shall be reduced by 2/37 of the lesser of 1. Such amount of itemized deductions, or 2, so much of the taxable income of the taxpayer for the taxable year determined without regard to the section increased by such amount of itemized deductions as exceeds the dollar amount at which the 37% tax bracket under Section 1 begins with respect to the taxpayer. B, coordination with other limitations. The section shall be applied after the application of any other limitation on allowance of any itemized deductions. B, limitation not applicable to determination of deduction for qualified business income. 1, in general, Section 199 AE1 is amended by inserting without regard to Section 68 and after shall be computed. 2, patrons of specified agricultural and horticultural cooperatives. Section 199 AG2B is amended by inserting Section 68 or after without regard to. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70112, extension and modification of qualified transportation fringe benefits. A, in general, Section 132F is amended 1 by striking subparagraph D of paragraph 1, 2, and paragraph 2 by inserting and at the end of subparagraph A by striking and at the end of paragraph 8. B, inflation adjustment. Clause 2 of Section 132F6A is amended by striking 1998 in Clause 2 and inserting 1997. C, coordination with disallowance of certain expenses. Subsection 1 of Section 274 is amended 1 by striking benefits and all that follows through no deduction and inserting benefits, no deduction, and 2 by striking paragraph 2. D, effective date. The amendments made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70113, extension and modification of limitation on deduction and exclusion for moving expenses. A, extension of limitation on deduction. Section 2017K is amended 1 by striking and before January 1st, 2026, and 2 by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. B, allowance of deduction for members of the intelligence community. Section 217K as amended by subsection A is further amended 1 by striking 2017 except in the case and inserting 2017, 1 in general except in the case, and 2 by adding at the end of the following new paragraph, 2 members of the intelligence community, and employee or new appointee of the intelligence community as defined in Section 3 of the National Security Act of 1947, 50 U.S.C. 3003, other than a member of the Armed Forces of the United States who moves pursuant to a change in assignment which requires relocation shall be treated for the purposes of this section in the same manner as an individual to whom subsection G applies. C, extension of limitation on exclusion. Section 132G2 is amended 1 by striking and before January 1st, 2026, and 2 by striking 2018 through 2025 in the heading and inserting beginning after 2017. D, allowance of exclusion for members of the intelligence community. 132G2 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by inserting or an employee or new appointee of the intelligence community as defined in Section 3 of the National Security Act of 1947, 50 U.S.C. 3003, other than a member of the Armed Forces of the United States who moves pursuant to a change in assignment that requires relocation after a change of station. E, effective date, the amendments made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70114, extension and modification of limitation on wagering losses. A, in general, Section 165 is amended by striking subsection D and inserting the following. D, wagering losses. 1, in general, for purpose of losses from wagering transactions, the amount allowed as a deduction for any taxable year, A, shall be equal to 90% of the amount of such losses during such taxable year, and B, shall only be allowed to the extent of the gains from such transactions during such taxable year. 2, special rule. For the purpose is a paragraph 1, the term losses from wagering transactions includes any deduction otherwise allowable under this chapter incurred in carrying on any wagering transaction. B, effective date, the amendments made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70115, extension and enhancement of increased limitation on contributions to able accounts. A, in general, Section 529AB2B is amended 1 in clause 1 by inserting determined by substituting 1996 for 1997 in paragraph 2B thereof after section 2503B, and 2 in clauses 2 by striking before January 1st, 2026. B, effective dates. 1 in general, except as otherwise provided in the subsection, the amendments made. This section shall apply to the contributions made after December 31st, 2025. 2, modified inflation adjustment. The amendment made by subsection A1 shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70116, extension and enhancement of savers credit allowed for able contributions. A, extension 1 in general. Section 25BD1 is amended to read as follows. 1, in general, the term qualified retirement savings contributions means with respect to any taxable year, the sum of A, the amount of contributions made by the eligible individual during such taxable year to the able account within the meaning of Section 529A, of which such an individual is the designated beneficiary, and B, in the case of any taxable year beginning before January 1st, 2027. 1, the amount of the qualified retirement contributions as defined in Section 219E made by the eligible individual. 2, the amount of 1, any elective deferrals as defined in Section 402G3 of such individual, and 2, any elective deferral of compensation by such individual under an eligible deferred compensation plan as defined in Section 457B of an eligible employer described in Section 457E1A, and 3, the amount of voluntary employee contributions by such individual to any qualified retirement plan as defined in Section 4974C, 2, coordination with Secure 2.0 Act of 2022 Amendment, paragraph 1 of Section 103E of the Secure 2.0 Act of 2022 was repealed, and the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 shall be applied and administered as though such paragraph were never enacted. 3, effective date. The amendments and repeal made by the subsection shall apply to taxable years ending after December 31st, 2025. B, increase of credit amount. 1, in general, Section 25BA is amended by striking $2,000 and inserting $2,100. 2, effective date. The amendment made by the subsection shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2026. Section 70117, extension of rollovers from qualified tuition programs to able accounts permitted. A, in general, Section 529C3C 13 is amended by striking before January 1st, 2026. B, effective date. The amendment made by the section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. Section 70118, extension of treatment of certain individuals performing services in the Sinai Peninsula and enhancement to include additional areas. Treatment made permanent, section 11026A of Public Law 115-97 is amended by striking with respect to the applicable period. Kenya, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad included as hazardous duty areas. Section 11026B of Public Law 15-97 is amended to read as follows. B, qualified hazardous duty area. For purposes of the section, the term qualified hazardous duty area means each of the following locations, but only
during the period for which any member of the Armed Forces of the United States is entitled to special pay under Section 310 of Title 37, United States Code, relating to special pay, duty subject to hostile fire or imminent danger for services performed in such location. 1, the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. 2, Kenya. 3, Mali. 4, Burkina Faso. 5, Chad. C, conforming amendment. Section 1126 of Public Law 115-97 is amended by striking subsections C and D. D, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall take effect on January 1st, 2026. Section 70119, extension and modification of exclusion from gross income of student loans discharged on account of death or disability. A, in general, Section 108F5 is amended to read as follows. 5, discharges on account of death or disability. A, in general, in the case of an individual, gross income does not include any amount which, but for this subsection, would be includable in gross income for such taxable year by reason of the discharge, in whole or in part, of any loan described in subparagraph B, if such a discharge was 1, pursuant to subsection A or D of Section 437 of the Higher Education Act of 1965, or the parallel benefit under Part D of Title IV of such act relating to the repayment of loan liability. 2, pursuant to Section 464C1F of such act, or 3, otherwise discharged on account of death or total and permanent disability of the student. B, loans discharged. A loan is described in this subparagraph if such loan is 1, a student loan as defined in paragraph 2, or 2, a private education loan as defined in Section 140A of the Consumer Credit Protection Act, 15 U.S.C. 1650A. C, Social Security number requirement. 1, in general, subparagraph A shall not apply with respect to any discharge during any taxable year unless the taxpayer includes the taxpayer's Social Security number on the return of tax for such taxable year. 2, Social Security number. For purposes of this subparagraph, the term Social Security number has the meaning given such term in Section 24H7. B, omission of correct Social Security number treated as mathematical or clerical error. Section 6213G2, as amended by this Act, is further amended by striking "and" at the end of subparagraph 5, by striking the period at the end of subparagraph W, and inserting "and by inserting after subparagraph W the following new subparagraph. X, an omission of a correct Social Security number required under Section 108F5C relating to discharges on account of death or disability. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to discharges after December 31st, 2025. Section 70120, limitation on individual deductions for certain state and local taxes, etc. A, in general, Section 164B6 is amended, 1, by striking "and before January 1, 2026, and 2, by striking $10,000, $5,000 in the case of a married individual filing a separate return, and inserting the applicable limitation amount, half the applicable limitation amount in the case of a married individual filing a separate return. B, applicable limitation amount. Section 164B is amended by adding at the end the following new paragraph. 7, applicable limitation amount. A, in general. For purposes of paragraph 6, the term applicable limitation amount means 1, in the case of any taxable year beginning in calendar year 2025, $40,000. 2, in the case of any taxable year beginning in calendar year 2026, $40,400. 3, in the case of any taxable year beginning after calendar year 2026 and before 2030, 101% of the dollar amount in effect under this subparagraph for taxable years beginning in the preceding calendar year. And 4, in the case of any taxable year beginning after calendar year 2029, $10,000. B, phase down based on modified adjusted gross income. 1, in general, except as provided in Clause 3, in the case of any taxable year beginning before January 1st, 2030, the applicable limitation amount shall be reduced by 30% of the excess, if any, of the taxpayer's modified adjusted gross income over the threshold amount, half the threshold amount in the case of a married individual filing a separate return. 2, threshold amount. For purposes of this subparagraph, the term threshold amount means 1, in the case of any taxable year beginning in calendar year 2025, $500,000. 2, in the case of any taxable year beginning in calendar year 2026, $505,000. And 3, in the case of any taxable year beginning after calendar year 2026, 101% of the dollar amount in effect under this subparagraph for taxable years beginning in the preceding calendar year. 3, limitation on reduction. The reduction under Clause 1 shall not result in the applicable limitation amount being less than $10,000. 4, modified adjusted gross income. For purposes of this paragraph, the term modified adjusted gross income means adjusted gross income increased by any amount excluded from gross income under Section 911, 931, or 933. C, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after